Okay, so this is another online Android programming class for STIW 2043. So today basically I'm going to talk about online database access through Android application. So this is going to be a little bit longer topics since it covers a lot of steps. So in your offline database, basically your database can be directly accessed from the Android application. SQLite database reside in local storage, and Android do not need any intermediary software to access the database. However, for online database access, the Android application will require additional steps to request the database. So the diagram here basically describe how the process goes. So Android application here need to access database, such as here we're going to use MySQL database. So the step that, or the process that the application need to perform is basically through the request, through the HTTP request, to request data from the server. So here basically Android application cannot directly request the SQL server its data, so it need middleman here, such as in this example we are using PHP as a middleman, or the middle software here, the middle manager, to request then to the SQL server. Okay, so the SQL server then return the result back to the PHP script, the server side script, and then the server script will return the data, or return the formatted data back to Android application, and Android application will basically read the formatted data. The data can be in JSON, in XML, in text file, and the Android application here will basically reformat and read the data to display back the data to user. So this is basically the circle that we're going to look in online database, where the application itself need to request through the PHP script here, through the PHP server side script. Okay, so there are a few requirements here that we need to fulfill. So there are the web server itself. So this part here, you can use the development web server, such as web server applications such as XAMPP. You can download for free. So XAMPP basically comprises a few other software, such as the web server itself. It uses Apache web server, and the database, MySQL database. So you can install this on your PC, or you can use your own web hosting, such as my example here. So this is my web hosting. So inside this web hosting, it basically contain my PHP my admin that allow me to access to the database, and also it provide me with a file manager that allow me to upload or edit any PHP document or any files that store in database. So by using web hosting, it basically allow your application to be accessible anywhere in this world, okay, because it is an online solution. The one that if you use applications such as XAMPP, you can only use this within your local area network or within your loopback address. So for testing the application, yes, it is good enough to use XAMPP, because XAMPP already provided all the features necessary to enable this tutorial. So if you decided to use XAMPP, so go ahead and download and make sure that you can access your web server if you enter https localhost/XAMPP. Okay, so basically we're going to return the following address. Okay, so once you install your web server application, you need to create a web server directory. So in this case, you can create folder within the folder XAMPP/htdocs. So this is where the web server directory is located. Okay, so you can create a new folder inside this directory called stuff, and you can access this directory. You can access this web directory from your web browser. The other component that you need to look into is that PHP my admin. Okay, the PHP my admin interface. Okay, you can access PHP my admin through the XAMPP main interface. So there's an option down here within the XAMPP menu, and that basically shows you the link to PHP my admin. Whereas inside here, you can create your database and manage your database easily. So for my example, I've used my web hosting application cPanel to create folder inside my. So in this example, my database, my folder name is staff system, and I can access this through my web browser. But of course, you need to set the server directory as a forbidden. Means that you cannot allow this to be able to browse directory browsing. Okay, then you need to access to your database. You need to create the following. So in my case, my database name is Slam6 staff, and the content of the there's a one table inside here called staff member, and within the staff member there are 4 fields. This is UID, name, staff ID, and department. Okay, UID, this is managed by the database system. It basically provide auto increment features. So the ID here will keep on increment its value on its own. So the only value that I need to use or I need to update is the name, staff ID, in, and also department. Okay, so here you can see all the fields and the table that you need to create. So staff member is the ID, name, staff ID, and department. You can also use the following SQL statement to create the table, and you're going to end up with the following: user ID, name, staff ID, and department. You can use staff ID as your primary key, but yeah, for the sake of the example here, I use UID as the primary key for this database application. Okay, so once you completed with your database, you set up your database and fields, you need to create then the handler for the database. So here we are using the example, the tutorial basically using PHP as the middle manager. So we need to access the PHP and to set up database connection. Okay, we need to enable the following step. Okay, so Android application should be able to request to PHP script. However, the PHP script need to prepare the communication or the connections to the database. Okay, so the first thing that you need to prepare is the DB Connect PHP. So this file basically handle the database connection between PHP and also the MySQL database. Okay, this is just some example that you can use for the database. Server name, username, password, database name, and then you set the connection object using MySQLi. Server name, username, password, and database name. Set the connection to the connect error. It will return error if there's a problem in the connection object. Else echo success means that you just want to check the database connection is success or not. So once you return this in your database, in your server directory. So in my case, I put it in folder staff system. So if you're using XAMPP, so you need to put it, you need to put this file, you need to save this file into your directory, into your application directory. Okay, so if you try to run this, or in your case, http localhost /staff system or staff /dbconnect.php. So if you set everything correctly, your database name, your database password, your server name correctly when you first created your database and your field, it shouldn't be any problem. If there's any problem, make sure that for example, if you're using XAMPP and you didn't provide any user for the database, so you need to make sure that you put your username as root and leave the database the password empty. That basically by default. Okay, you need to change this because this is by default. So once you get that successful, you need to delete back. This is just for testing. Okay, you need to delete the echo test, and yeah, just delete this because you don't want to get any return the data later. So remove echo success from your database. From your DB Connect PHP. So that later in the connection won't return anything. if it is success. Okay, so my example here, DB Connect. Okay, so remove the else statement. You don't want to get any else statement inside here. If it returns success, because every connection after this is going to use this DB Connect .php. Okay, so once you get that completed, we're going to start with the first database operation, insert. You want to insert data to the database using PHP. So go ahead and create new file in the server directory called insert.php. Okay, so insert.php here will use dbconnect.php, and it uses the post array, okay, to get value from the URL. So there are basically three variables that we're going to use here: name, staff ID, and department. Okay, so this basically we get this value from the post array submitted through URL. The SQL statement here basically perform the insert SQL statement. So insert into the table staff member. There are three tables that we're using here: name, staff ID, and department, with three corresponding value that we get from the post array: name, staff ID, and department. And this is just basically just to check if the SQL statement correctly executed by the server. So if connection successful, execute SQL, and it is true, return echo success. Else it return echo error, means that this instruction something wrong with the SQL statement. Okay, so that basically for the insert statement. So you get the code here. So you can test the script first. In my example, I use post, but here this is basically just to test the database connectivity. So we use get array. Get array basically quite simple because we can test using our database, our PHP, by submitting the get array through URL. It is visible, so we can just use this statement and test the PHP file to make sure that the PHP and also the database is basically can talk to each other, can add data, delete data, update data, or search data. Okay, so means that this is basically just to test. Okay, so if your test successful, you need to change back this to post array. Okay, because in the Android application we use post array to submit value to the to request value from the database. Okay, so once you get that, you test the URL. So in my case, I use my server directory, my server domain. But in your case, if you use localhost, you need to change this to localhost and your server directory and put insert and with this get array. Okay, name, staff ID, and also department. So then you need to check your database. If nothing wrong with the instruction with your PHP file, you should get new data into your database. Okay, when you check your field, your table name, staff member, you should be able to get data populated into your database. Okay, so please note that you need to change this from get to post once the testing completed. Alright, next we move on to the Android application. So the Android application, you need to design the following interface. So this is the application, the interface of the application. So there are three inputs here. You have one edit text name, edit text ID, and spinner for IT. Not spinner for department. And then you have buttons here. There's a 4 button, 1, 2, 3, 4. There's a 4 basic database operation. And finally, there's a 1 ListView component here that basically will list down all the data from the database later. Okay, so you can refer this component tree to design the database. So here again, I'm using scroll view and linear layout as my main layout because I'm not quite fond with the constraint layout. So the programming start with the following. Okay, so to enable insert operation, so we start with the definition of the object for edit text. So we have edit text and then we have spinner. So define your edit text and spinner reference to the layout component, to its layout component. Next, you need to create one HTTP request handler. So here I'm using my own class called a request handler. So this class basically going to handle all the HTTP communication or requests from Android to the server. However, you can use different HTTP handler, such as you can use OK HTTP. So that is also basically good. But in my case, I just use a request handler. So request handler basically is this file, this class file. You need to create new Java file in your project and then use this as your and add this to your project. You can also download from the following website, Android request handler. Okay, you can get from here, slumberger.com/android/requesthandler.java. So you can download this and you can copy all this and put it into your Android. So you should get this requesthandler.java. Okay, requesthandler.java. So this class basically going to handle all the HTTP communication, HTTP requests from Android application. Okay, so next what we need to do, we need to add the following method into our into main activity. Okay, this is just a view method, so you can see it's quite simple. So the view method here, string name, ed name, get text to string, and there's a three input that we get from the interface, name, ID, and department. And there's a class add user, and it basically uses async task method, and it allow you to add run the request process as a background process. Always remember, any request to the database or any request to online, we need to put it in background process so that it won't stop our interface from functioning. So put the process of requesting data to database using async task class. So class add user, extend async task. So inside here, on pre, do in background, on post. Okay, so if you're familiar with the async task class, you can see it will always contain these three methods. On pre, this is basically just to show the progress dialog. Okay, so we define our progress dialog, that looping that shows some positive feedback to user. And do in background, this is where we request, okay, because the task of Android is basically just to request and receive data. So to request, we use hashmap to define our post request. So the hashmap here will submit 3 value: name, staff ID, and department. And here you can see the request handler, that the class that I mentioned before. So the request handler basically will perform or execute all the requests through the server. So this is my server, so you can use your own server. So my server basically pointed to insert.php, the file that I've shown you before, and submit hashmap as a post request. Okay, so you have your URL here, and this is your post array handled by hashmap. Okay, so once the request completed and the basically when it execute this and insert into database and it returns success, and when it returns success, it basically return to the as string. Okay, either this is success or not, or fail. Okay, there's only 2 conditions here, success or error. So if it returns success, it will return to string s. Okay, so the string s then will forwarded the value, either it is success or error, to on post execute. Okay, so within the on post execute, this is where your method is allowed to access the interface. You cannot access your interface in do in background. You can only access this on post execute. So here we just toast a simple success. So if s that we receive from do in background here success, means that you get the value success. Okay, so else you just put it as fail. So here there's a method here, so I'm going to describe this later. So this is where we just refresh the list view. So basically the same with our offline database, where we need to refresh the content of the database. So the list view that handled by show staff list view method. This part is basically where I execute the this class. Okay, so add user, new add user dot execute. Okay, so you basically execute this class and execute the 3 methods that available here. Alright, so once you get that clear, so basically you need to add users permission in your Android manifest. So don't forget to do this, if not you're going to get error. Android require permission. Okay, and then you can just run the program and fill all the required fields. So once you add all this information, you can see your database is being populated with data. Okay, so make sure to follow that exactly as it is, because all other operations basically going to perform more or less the same with this structure. Okay, the second thing that we need to do is to display data. So here I'm going to introduce the use of custom list view. So to display data, so we're going to use the custom list view. Let me run the AVD first. Okay, so to display data from database to application, it is important for us to know that the database is successfully inserted, because without any confirmation, we have no idea if the data is successfully being added to database or not. We need to open the database and see that the entry is there. So we use our list view, or what we call as a custom list view, to display data from database. So any update or any new entry to the database, it basically going to appear in this list view, so that user confirm the data is there. Okay, so to do that, create a new file called search.php in your server directory. Okay, so here basically we're going to use a simple SQL statement. So this is the content of the search.php. So what it does, basically, Android application will request this file, will request this PHP file, and then will receive data in what we call as a JSON structure. So when the application requests, the PHP basically going to request or make query to a database. So this is basically to load everything from table staff member. Select all from staff member, and we have this object result, and this result basically will hold or will contain the query that written from database. So in this section, if statement here, from here to here, this is basically where we traverse the content of result and formatted the content into JSON file structure. So the way that we do is that we use while statement. Okay, so we need to get the content first, because the value that we're going to store is in response array. So while row, okay, while row equal result. So remember, result that we get from database. Fetch association. So it's going to fetch data for every field and every line. Record, sorry. So every record that traverses line by line by result is going to be stored in this user list array. Okay, so we start with the user list name, user list staff ID, user list department. So all the value that we get from row, name, row, staff ID in the database, and row, department in the database. And then we push the array into response array user and then user list. So this is basically the structure that we're going to later encode into JSON encoder using JSON encoder. Okay, so if there's any data that written more than 0, means that there's data written from the query. Execute this, and then JSON encode here, the PHP function that allow us to format the data into JSON type format. Okay, so if you try to get the file from JSON, you should be able to get the following data. Okay, so if there's any data in the database, it's basically going to return in JSON text format. Okay, so this is basically the format that's going to be written. So if you search staff system search.php, it will basically return the following information. Okay, so this is JSON data format. So if you try to reformat the data, so this is how the data is being formatted. So there's a 3 data here: name, staff ID, and department, and this is all user divided in this curly bracket 1, 2, 3. Okay, now we need to format, and then we need to show this in ListView. Okay, the way that we do this is that we use what we call as a custom list view. Okay, so custom list view basically requires the following codes. So you need to create new interface, or the way that we want to display. So here I create one file called list activity that basically will contain these 3 information: ID, name, and department. So this list activity basically going to populate into the list view. It's going to be a custom list view inside here. and it's going to populate all the data into list view. So the list view now contain more than one data. It contains 3 data for every entry. Alright. This example. Okay, so you can see the data here is being populated in this structure 1, 2, 3. So this comes from list activity. Okay, so we just create new file here and add 3 entry to the, or 3 text view to this. So whatever structure that you like to have, you can design it here, because it is going to be display into list view. Okay, into here. Okay, you can see from the interface. This is basically reflected by list activity, 1 list activity, 2 list activity, and everything is being populated into this list view. Okay, so the way that we do that is we still use this method. We use show stuff list view method, and we use the class show stuff, and this is basically the same class as before. As in insert, you have on pre, do in background, and on post. However, you can see that in the on pre, on do in background, we request the URL for the search.php, and the search.php basically will return this file, will return the JSON file to the S string handler here. Okay, so this statement, the if statement here, basically going to repurpose or to read the S file and put it into a formatted array. Okay, so it will basically traverse the content of database, the content of the JSON array, and put it into hash map. Okay, so you get string as name, as ID, as name. So this one basically comes from the JSON object, from the S, and it's going to put into user list array, and then the user list array is going to be populated into the list adapter. So you can see the list array here, the list array user list. Okay, you can see the user list here. This is user list. Where is it? This is user list, and this is all the value that we're going to show in the text, in the custom list view. List activity, name, ID, department, name, ID, department. Okay, so we populate the LV stuff, the array, with the adapter that we define it here, and here we execute the list view, and basically the list view is going to populate, is going to run this whenever we call show stuff list view. Okay, so whenever we call it, the list view is going to be refreshed, and if there's any operation to add, delete, and update, it will basically going to update the operation. Okay, so you can see that the show stuff list view here. Okay, so this is the method. It's quite long, but yeah. So within the do in background, this is where you really need to focus, because when the request return the JSON format, this is basically the one that's going to read and read the content of the JSON data structure and put it into into the user array, into the array here, so that later you can populate the list view, this list view with, or this is a custom list view. How do I know this is a custom list view? You can see that the r.layout pointed to list activity.xml that we define it here. And there's a three component in this list activity. So it basically represents name, ID, and department, and the data that we put it here, name, ID, and department in the user else as array. Name, ID, department, it must be the same with this. Name, ID, department, name, ID, department. And this one comes from the list activity, txt name, txt ID, and txt department. Okay, and then you just refresh the adapter. So every time you call this show stuff list view, it's basically going to refresh the content of the database. So let me add another value here. So Johan Hazim, ID, ID, okay, so department, account. So when we add, it's going to insert and load the content in the list view. Okay, so 1, 2, 3. Now there's a 3 content, there's a 3 value here in the database. Okay, so that basically how you do the custom list view. So you need to have the list activity. So you don't have to put this list view or list activity in manifest, because this is being called from the activity main, and it is part of activity main. The custom list view implemented by the list view here basically going to handle the custom list view. Okay, so yeah, that basically it. So you really need to focus on this part. This is the critical part. You need how many data that you want to use. So you need to put it inside here. You need to define and get string from the JSON array that written here. Okay, so we get the S, and the S is being processed by JSON object, and then the JSON object is going to be going to get the array user, and is assigned by user D, and then we loop user D, and then we get the JSON object C. So it is a little bit tricky, but just follow the flow, and the only thing that you need to focus on is this part. Okay, so you need to look at the structure of your JSON. So you can refer that this is 3 part here. There's a 3 part. This is the only one array for user, and then for data that we put into the JSON data format is in this structure. Alright, so this is where you define your list view, and then here I put it on create method because whenever I run the project, I want it to show the list view, the custom list view. So that's why I put it in here, show stuff list view. Okay, so we're done with that. The delete operation, it is basically the same with insert, but with the delete command here. Okay, so the delete SQL statement here, delete from staff member where staff ID is equal staff ID. So we get the post statement, and again, so you can see now it basically repeat itself. So now I use a delete data view and get the value that I want to delete. So it means that the ID that I want to delete, and this is basically the class that handle the delete operation. And you have the on pre, do in background, on post. So here I just use the staff ID because I just want to submit staff ID as the handler, sorry, for the post array. Okay, so submit that, and on post you just either you get success or you get fail. Okay, and then you just do success or fail, and you call this from button delete. For update, also the same process. You create this file update.php in server directory, and then you create the update data method and call it. success or not, it literally the same, okay. The search data, that basically the only things that basically a little bit different, but basically perform the same with the population of data into ListView. Okay, so here this is the search single. You just want to search for single data, so we perform select all from, we create this file into server directory, select all from staff member where staff ID equals staff ID. So we perform the query, and here we use JSON. Okay, we use JSON encoder. If results more than 0, so we fetch the data into a user list. Either if you just want to get one data, you just select one data and you can just use if statement to submit the data. But here maybe I want to use more than one data, so you might want to get this into while statement, but you can also use if statement and get the first data only. Okay, and this is basically the same with the search. Okay, and we'll return all the data. And here this is also basically the same with the search operation. So the search operation, the list all data in database, basically the same. It is basically the same. Yeah, it is basically the same. So just call this from on click, and then it basically enable the search operation. So here if I want to search let's say 5543, so search. Okay, so it basically display 5543. There's only one data here. To enable these features means that if you want to enable the click features, sorry, not this one, staff management, online staff management. Okay, so if you want to enable this on click, okay, yeah, I click on this, the data is going to appear here. Click on this, it's going to show here. So implement the list view set on item click listener. That's it. Okay, use string at position, and then this is basically some trimmer for the string. So depend on your data. So make sure that this is for my data, name, ID, interval, because the JSON data will return in JSON format. So I need to do some trimming. So a little bit tricky here because of the trimming operation. So and then we just this is for the, because I use a spinner, so I need to use this to repopulate or to select the correct department. But this one just set text, and based on the user array that we perform here, it basically return when I click here, it's basically going to correspond to the input that we put here. Okay, so implement that in your list view. So this is the place that I put. So this is the list view. Okay, so right after show staff list view, that will basically populate the data in the list view, and this is where I put the list view staff set on item click listener, so that when I click on the list view, it's going to show data here. Okay, so there's only 1, 2, 3 data. Okay, so you need to look into this, because when you click, it basically going to return in certain format, and this basically will perform trimming, replace. So you need to do some trimming. Okay, because you just want to get the data, so trim. Okay, so that basically for online stuff, online management or basic online database. Of course, I didn't perform any operation such as text validation, data collation. Data collation can be performed if you set the metric or the staff ID as a unique number, means that it's going to return error if you try to add the same data. Confirmation dialog, so either you want to delete the data or you want to add the data, so you probably need to add the confirmation dialog, yes or no. And the progress bar, so the progress bar is also being used. That the progress bar should be okay. I already introduced the progress bar. Okay, so basically we've done with the online database management and how basically you can use the so you can see this is my server directory. So DB Connect, delete, insert, search, search single, and update. Okay, so if you have any question, you can ask through the learning system, or you can also use the YouTube comment in the comment section, so you can ask any questions. So that basically it.